Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. Brothers, sisters, friends, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I haven't done one of these for a while, so please do excuse me if I'm not as on point as normal. But one of the things that you may have heard of course, recently, over the past couple of days, the organization called Prevent Watch. If you haven't visited their website, please do, or see them on social media. Prevent Watch has highlighted a case that is deeply disturbing and is of concern, I believe, for all Muslims, and indeed people who are not Muslim background at all. We know that schools are a place that we are taught to learn, that we are supposed to gain the ideas that take us to the future, that direct us where we want to go later on in life, and we begin by exploring those ideas at a place called school. In school, we are entrusted, or we have rather entrusted the teachers to look after the welfare of our children, to ensure that they are not targeted or bullied by anyone, not by other children and not by other teachers. And indeed, Muslims in particular understand the idea of learning. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, "Talab al-ilm faridatun ala kulli Muslim," that seeking knowledge is an obligatory duty upon every Muslim, and that includes men and women, boys and girls. And of course, the very first word revealed, we believe, as Muslims in the Quran was iqra. Read or proclaim, read in the name of your Lord. And this word is the beginning of a chapter in the Quran called Surah Al-Alaq, which is the essence of the first message to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And this message was, read, proclaim, learn, teach people that which they do not know, by the Lord who has taught them that which they did not know. And so you can imagine a child in Britain in 2018 was asked by counter-terrorism, get this into your head, an 8-year-old child at school under the tutelage of his teachers is taken into a separate room and spoken to by 2 counter-terrorism officers. Remember, terrorism, the definition of terrorism is the use of violence to achieve a ideological or political aim. Now, this 8-year-old was spoken to and questioned by these counter-terrorism officers from SO15. And what did they ask him? They asked him about his if he could recite, if he could read certain verses, certain surahs from the Quran. And he actually recited the verses to them in Arabic. Now, this child is not an Arab, and most Muslims know that despite the fact that many Muslims may not know the Arabic language, they memorize the Quran in order that it's preserved and that they gain reward from it, and they feel the attachment that all Muslims do to the Quran. So children across the Muslim and world, or the world where Muslims reside, are learning and memorizing the Quran on a daily basis. So they asked this child to recite certain verses from the Quran, and he does so. He recites Surah At-Tin, which is about essentially the fig tree. Surah Al-Kahf, which is the cave, or at least the last parts of it, the last 2 verses from it. And he's also asked to recite Surah Al-Alaq. And of course, Surah Al-Alaq begins with read in the name of your Lord. And that's precisely what the kid had come to school to do, to read, not to be interrogated about reading, about what he reads outside of school. And the child then is asked repeated questions. Now, this is really important that we understand this, that this is happening outside of any parental agreement or presence. The parents have given no consent at all to these police officers interrogating this child. And the question has to be, why are they interrogating this child? What's the reason? And of course, really, we know that it's because of the PREVENT program, the looking for signs of radicalization. And what are these signs of radicalization? They ask the child if he can then interpret, if he can then translate what he's just read. And the child says, I don't know Arabic, I don't know what these verses mean, but I believe that they are good, and that's enough. And that's, they say to him, they're very interested in the meaning of this. And one of these officers, I'm led to believe, is a so-called Muslim officer. And he would know, wouldn't he, unless he's an Arabic speaker and fluent in the sciences of the understanding of the commentaries on the Quran and so forth, and the reasons why different verses were revealed. He would know that he would be just as clueless as that child, unless he'd studied anything beyond that. Nonetheless, he proceeded into continuing to ask this child, what are the meanings of these verses that you've learnt? And the child himself becomes very frightened, of course, as he would. And you can see some of what he'd gone through. If you go to the website of Prevent Watch, you can see an interview or with the child where he's speaking with his face blacked out, and the name that he's assumed or has been given is Adam. It's not his real name. We want to, I believe, Prevent Watch wanted to of course protect his identity, but it didn't end there. The saga didn't end there. Shortly after this, the mother was allowed to come and spoken to by the officers, and then they proceeded to come to the house where the mother lives, and then again start asking questions. This time around, they asked the mother about her views. They asked her, what does she think about July the 7th? They asked her, what does she think about the London Bridge attacks? And she responded by saying, I think this has something to do with the Middle East. And they replied to her saying, no, it's not because of that. It's because what's in the Quran. Now that's really important, because these are officers under the purview of Prevent, working for counter-terrorism, that are suggesting that a book that is followed by and adhered to by a quarter approximately of the world's global population are somehow now attached to a book that makes people carry out these acts of violence indiscriminately because of something they've read in a book, most of whom don't understand it unless they're Arabs, and this family is not an Arabic-speaking family. So these police officers then proceed to continue to press her and ask her, do you know the meaning of the verses in the Quran, in particular Surah Al-Bayyinah? Now, for those of you who are Muslims, know that Surah Al-Bayyinah is in the the middle part of the last juz, or the last 30th chapter of the Quran, and it addresses many issues, including those people who are from the people of the book, the people who are polytheists and so forth, and describes what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about the best of creation and the worst of creation. The police officers say, you regard us based upon this verse from the Quran as the worst of creation. And making this inference suggests that they of course have no comprehension of the Quran at all, and take, but more importantly, that they would seek to target a person who doesn't, as I said, know the Arabic language, and get them to give an explanation of the meaning of the verse as if they were some sorts of scholars. Now, here, neither the questioner nor the questioned is knowledgeable enough to give the right answers, but that doesn't matter, because never let the facts or any understanding or education get in the way of Islamophobia. And that's precisely what's happening. Recently, there's been this big discussion, hasn't there, about the definition of Islamophobia. But what has been missed in all of this is that we're talking about Islamophobia, anti-Muslim attacks on the streets, but this is happening at a state level, very systematically, and it is in fact far more insidious and far more destructive. One of the things that what's happened to the family of Adam, of course, is that they are now seeking this. This took place in London in the summer. They're now seeking legal advice and are trying to work out what, if anything, they can do in order to seek or get some justice. What do you do if somebody comes along and starts to interrogate you about the Quran? I know they used to do this to us in Guantanamo. They used to rip the Quran up into pieces and throw it into the toilet. I remember on one occasion when they were giving us the Qurans, the American soldiers would say, "Come and get your Quran. Come and take your Quran. Learn how to kill Americans." And this was the sort of thing that has, throughout recent history, and continues to be used in order to demonize the Muslims. It isn't any more about, and in fact, as far as the far right was concerned, it never was about Muslims. It was Islam itself. The famous, now discredited far right politician Nick Griffin said that the problem with the Quran, the problem exists with the Quran, not the Muslims. It's the actual Quran, the teaching of the Quran itself. He said Quran teaches pedophilia, Quran teaches rape. And this is precisely what Tommy Robinson has been doing now. He's even written a book. And I know that's difficult to actually comprehend that guy could write anything. But nonetheless, he claims to have written a book. I'm not going to give the title of it. I don't want to give him any space or airtime from my words. But suffice to say that, again, his so-called book is based and focused solely on the Quran and in an attempt to demonize the Quran. So what these counter-terrorism officers are doing, in fact, what the Prevent program is doing, is now mirroring and parroting and aping the exact views and methods of the far right. The problem isn't Muslims with foreign policy. The problem isn't the demonization. The problem isn't socio-economic issues and so forth. The problem is your book, your belief. And this, my dear brothers, my friends, my sisters, imams, heads of Islamic centers and so forth, understand this, understand it well, because you all read the Quran. There's no difference of opinion on this. There's no groupisms or sectarianism when it comes to this. We all believe in respect and sanctify that glorious Quran. And that glorious Quran now is being targeted. And it's a natural progression or regression, if you like, in terms of where this was all going to go. If there wasn't going to be a concerted effort and response from the Muslim community, a unified response, in that if they target one, they target all, even if we disagree, if we fix in-house our problem. But when the state comes along and starts saying to one group of people and turns them against another, you are good and you are bad because of your interpretation of the Quran, eventually, because of this ability that they've mastered from the arts of colonization that they did in our lands, what they have done is turn one up against one another and essentially say they don't interpret the Quran properly, we do. But in the end, they turn around and say it doesn't matter how you interpret it, because that's what it says. The problem is your book. We don't give a damn about interpretations or context, which is what we've seen with Islamophobia time and again over the years. So what? What do we do? Where do we go from this? As I said, it's important to understand and get the context of this, that this is about the Prevent program, preventing violent extremism. Prevent, for those of you who don't know, it has been most toxic in schools already, on children. There's all this talk about safeguarding children, but who's safeguarding the children from the heavy hand of the state? When the child himself is being asked about what is it that your father teaches you, it has echoes of what took place in Spain, in Andalusia, when the Christians or the Reconquista came into Spain and started to look at signs of people who were Muslims And what they would do is go to the children and ask the children, does your father have a bath on Fridays? Does he wake up in the morning and pray up extra early? Do they somehow manage to eat food? Because they were all forcibly converted. Now, I'm not saying this is anywhere near as bad as that, but these are some of the signs of history, and if we are blind to them and oblivious to what's taking place now, because if we don't take a stand now, a unified stand now, then what's going to happen next? We used to say, I mean, nobody even speaks anymore about Surah Al-Tawbah or Surah Al-Anfal or parts of Surah Al-Imran or An-Nisa or Surah Muhammad, which talk specifically about issues in relation to warfare and so forth. But Surah Al-Bayyinah, which is part of the last juz that every pretty much child is learning, even as we speak, or has learnt over the past several years in Quran in school, whether you are Shia, Sunni, whether you are Deobandi, whether you are Ikhwani, Hizb ut-Tahrir, Salafi, Barelwi, whichever background you are from, you are all included. And make no mistake about that, that this targeting, if we allow it to continue in this way without a robust response and an outright rejection, they will come then next for Surah Al-Ikhlas, for Surah Al-Fatiha. In fact, they already have in some ways. And those of you who are Muslims will understand, for us Surah Al-Fatiha is like the Lord's Prayer. There's no compromise on it. There's nothing, in fact, it's the very essence of Islam and Islamic belief. So, you know, in the end of all of this case of Adam, what happened? The aftermath was that child services and police got together, they came along, spoke to the family, and you know what they said? They said there were no concerns of radicalization, none whatsoever. So they had left this family, this young boy in particular, an 8-year-old, traumatized. The kids, other kids would have known in the school that this young boy has been taken off to a special room and spoken to by older people, other people. Who are they? What does a child know about counter-terrorism officers? Most adults don't know much about it, let alone children. So what does that do to an individual? What does it do to the family? What does it do to the extended society around them? It makes them afraid. It is intended to send a message, even if it's not an overt message, but a message that you may be not involved in anything bad at all, but we've still got our eye on you, and we're watching every move that you make. And as I've heard that the father may have been involved in some da'wah stall, or may have visited even a da'wah stall, I don't know exactly the detail of that, that would be enough to earn the the watchful eye of the state to come to look at you. At Cage, we've been telling our followers and supporters again and again that it's okay, let them watch us, because we watch them right back. We note, we document, we campaign against all of these policies that have been counterintuitive and counterproductive and downright immoral. And we will continue to do so. Our friends, our erstwhile friends at Prevent Watch are doing a brilliant job in documenting and listing the numbers of cases that they have come across. And again, we know there have been cases of prevent interventions through social services, into health services and so forth. But the worst place is in education. The worst place is in schools, because children, especially primary school children, are the most vulnerable. And we've heard some of the horror, literally the horror stories of those cases that have reached back and become national news now. In fact, that's people quote them across the board. Prevent is not only a toxic brand, it is a destructive and corrosive brand. And this case should galvanize the Muslim community together. It is the Quran, it is our very soul. The Quran is our ability to discern right from wrong. We'll be asked about it on Yawm al-Qiyamah. We'll be asked about what we did with it. Was it an evidence for us, or was it an evidence against us? And so it doesn't matter when it comes to the sanctity of the Quran or to try to interrogate it, they can ask questions about it. Of course they can. Islam is not beyond being questioned, but who and why is key. And if they're doing it in order to frighten our children or frighten the parents, I mean, imagine what the next step would be. Literally, people pull their children out of Quran class. Is that the next step? That we literally say, no longer will we allow our children or send our children to Quran class or teach them at home to learn the Quran because they could be put under the purview of the state and under suspicion. Is that what we're going to do, or are we going to take a stand? So that is the question that I'm going to leave you all with, inshallah. I'm going to hopefully, again, say to you, please do support the work of Cage, support Prevent Watch. Ensure that you follow our updates, follow us on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, on our websites. And we are currently, even now, speaking about our Separating Families report. The very fact that prevent interventions have taken place around the country. Senior police officers like Mark Rowley have said that over 100 children have been separated from their families because of or with prevent interventions and been made wards of court. Now that's a shocking number of families that's happened to. We know that there is, of course, violence taking place in the name of Islam and the name of the far right and so forth, and that's something that needs to be addressed and tackled. But when it comes to children, I mean, let me give you an example. Even the Kurdish forces who are on the ground in Syria or in Iraq have said that it is absolutely unconscionable to take children away from their parents, children away from their mothers, particularly in relation to prisoners, female prisoners that they're holding with their families. So this notion of attempting to separate children from their families on the premise that they are being radicalized, or on the premise that they are being, it's part of the fight against terrorism, simply doesn't hold. It does not hold. The child has to be under serious threat, or for the state to intervene to try to take the child away. Safeguarding procedures already existed in our schools. Now what's happened is that this is no longer about safeguarding. This is about trying to criminalize ideology, belief, trying to criminalize Islam. And we have to stand against it. So Jazakumullah khair. I'm sorry for taking up so long. Please, inshallah, if you do like what you've heard, share it. And I'll speak to you again soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.